Hello, welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Bob Scarborough.
I'm Jade Walle.
And we are the FAIRtax
guys
+1. Actually, Scarborough, I think we can just go ahead and call Jade a full-fledged FAIRtax guy. He does the Wally's World here on a regular basis, and will guest host as need be. So, Jade, you're officially one of us now.
Knowledge. He's the guy that has the accounting knowledge to dig in and understand, and the passion that everybody else has. So, absolutely. Hey, we're all volunteers, right? And you be a FAIRtax guy too out there listening. Just be like John Gaver and get those pledges signed.
Now, don't talk about John Gaver here anymore. That made my Siri go off last week. So
right. That's right.
Okay. Well, we'll do that.
What was this that Bob Scarborough was talking about volunteer? I was expecting a pay raise now that I'm, christened.
Oh, you didn't get that? We mailed that out just the other day. Some pocket change and a couple of pieces of lint.
Tell you what, we'll double your salary. We'll put another zero in front of it.
That's right. 0 point.
Okay. Well, we have got a really special edition of FAIRtax Power Radio this time. This thing's going to air on April the 12th, which is closest to the tax filing deadline. And of course, we've been really banging on the IRS for the past few weeks here on FAIRtax Power Radio, and I can't think of any.
We're going to get a knock on the door one day.
Yeah, any government agency that deserves it more. But we wanted to do something special for this one because it's tax season. Everybody's pulling their hair out trying to get their tax returns done. So we indeed have enlisted the services of our CPA friend Jade Walle over there to go through what does the income tax system actually cost the American people in terms of time, money, and you've got some really interesting figures here.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. And first of all, we're just a few days away from the tax filing deadline. And this year, I think we can all rest and feel good about our IRS and our income tax system because instead of April 15th, the tax filing deadline for most of us is April 18th because of Emancipation Day in Washington, D.C. And also, if you live in Maine and Massachusetts, you actually have until April 19th because of Patriots Day holiday in those states. So I think we're all good and we can just close the program because with those extensions, what's the problem?
Oh, thanks for coming, everybody. Good to see you next week. All right. Thank you. Just kidding. Stay tuned. Stay tuned. Lots of great information about what is the cost of our income tax system. It's a big one.
And of course, the key thing is we don't have to do it this way. There is a better way to do it. Is there not, Mr. Walle?
Yeah, and I really attack this, Bob, from two angles: money and time. These are two of the things that occupy a lot of our energy, our imagination. They occupy our days. They take up our family time. And so if we dive into money, let's really look at the cost, like your original question really is. And there's multiple estimates out here, but the highest one I found is annual U.S. and payroll tax system compliance costs that we all pay across the U.S. is around $600 billion a year. There's various studies. Sorry.
So how do you bring that home to people who just really don't see, well, it doesn't cost me much, so it's not a big deal?
Yeah, great question. We'll try to make this a little bit more real for every listener, for whether you're a big corporate high flying executive or a sole proprietor plumber or just a guy making a paycheck. Let's bring this down and make this real. There's various studies and estimates on the compliance cost. Even the IRS reports on this. And in 2009, the IRS estimated the compliance cost each year closer to about $100 billion. The Tax Foundation estimated over $409 billion as of 2016. This, of course, all makes sense because the length and complexity of our tax code has increased dramatically, doubling in size and length since 1985. So that's our tax code, the pages, doubling in size and length since 1985. That's incredible. So these costs, what do they include? These are salaries of corporate tax accountants, office supplies, office space, real estate, tax software systems and packages, special bank accounts, IRS audit time, 12 billion annual IRS budget, etc. And this includes massive amounts for multinational and large companies like the Fortune 500, like you might imagine. However, this includes medium-sized businesses and small businesses as well. These figures are, in my opinion, one of the key drivers of why the Small Business Association of America endorses the fair tax. So the IRS noted in a report that as of 2009, a little bit dated, approximately 89% of U.S. business tax returns were prepared by paid professionals. So all of a sudden, let's jump into the world of business. And you think business is a little bit more sophisticated. Maybe they've got accountants that they've hired like Jade Walle or others that would be able to prepare their own tax returns. Nope. 89% of businesses prepare their tax returns by paying professionals to do it. That shows you a lot about how complex our system is. And guess what? Paying it.
It obviously shows that the businessman knows the value of his time and realizes the complexity of the tax code and says, I'm better off paying somebody who's in the groove than I am doing it myself, because I can spend my time better by doing things that actually help propel my business forward.
That's exactly right, Bob. That is exactly right, because there's not only a money cost there, but a time cost that we'll talk about as well. Yep, you're exactly right. Exactly right. And you probably remember seeing reports years ago. It's a famous example of GE's 2011 tax return. It had 57,000 total pages. Just let that sink in. 57,000. So think about the time and the money there. This resulted in a tax liability of goose egg.
Yeah, but do you realize that tax return is still smaller than the tax code?
Yes.
Right. That's right.
That's right. That's right. I see different estimates on the tax code, Bob. Like I've seen 66,000 pages, 77,000, 75,000 pages when you put all the court rulings, the tax law, the tax code, the revenue interpretations, and the actual legislation itself. But that's a lot of pages. But 57,000 was coming close there, wasn't it?
That's 114 reams of paper.
Where does the cost that we're talking about right now, where does that cost go? In the business has to, make money for the shareholders and make a profit. Corporations do. Small business, a little bit different, goes in the owner's pocket. But where does this money go? I mean, it's going to be an expense to the company. It goes to the consumer, the purchaser of the services, the goods of the company that's paying all these exorbitant fees to have their taxes calculated every year?
Yeah, it's a great question. And of course, some politicians would have you believe that it's, greedy corporations, it just comes out of their pockets. But the reality of how business works, and a lot of Americans know this to be true, so this is why you can't fool the American people, is there's a set amount of costs that go into making your widget or selling your service to the public or to other businesses. And those are things like payroll, gasoline, insurance, electric bills for your business location if you have one, and other G&A, general and administrative expenses, such as lawyers, consultants, and accountants. And it just is another cost that goes into the bucket of costs that produces what you'd call a base amount that you then have to charge a retail or end user fee to your other business or to your retail public to make any kind of a profit. So whatever that cost is, you got to charge something higher to make any kind of money.
Yeah, let me ask you something here real quick. Just out of curiosity, use your professional expertise and give me an estimate on how much GE paid to have that 57,000 page tax return prepared.
Right. So I work for a Big Four public accounting firm, and I can safely guess that we're in the tens and tens of millions of dollars of professional service fee to some accounting firm to help them with that. We're talking tens and tens of millions of dollars. And so think about those GE products that you might buy. Guess who's paying those tens and tens of millions of dollars that's going to some Big Four public accounting firm? Well, you are when you buy that GE microwave.
I guess they figured that was worth it. I mean, that the tax liability, had they paid it, would have been more than that. Is that a reasonable conclusion?
Absolutely. A lot of clients I see in the firm, they'll pay fees, hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars to the firms because the benefit they think they can get is higher than those costs. It's not always true. Sometimes you end up owing a lot of money, maybe owing a little bit less than you thought. Sometimes you end up owing a little bit more, but you still got to pay those consultant fees to help you with that analysis.
Okay. And so we don't lose our listeners who are like me. They just, hey, I have to keep up with everything. I've got the shoebox over at the CPA firm now, as they're working through to find out what I didn't make, but spent as an expense in my operation. But with the FAIRtax, if we stop the program right now and said, okay, all that money that we've been talking about, that big companies pay for compliance, just within the cost of doing business to keep track of your taxes, that money would come completely away from that business's expense lines with the FAIRtax, meaning that competition is going to drive down the cost of similarly competing businesses to provide the service or the product that you are buying, that they're presenting for you. And you will be able to essentially walk out the door with a product that costs maybe a little less. And of course, as we talk about the FAIRtax and the prebate, you get you get to save a little more money there, because you get the cost up to the poverty level of goods and services that you would consider to be essential to your family. You get that money back. Competition with the FAIRtax is going to cause the imbalance of the cost of the expense of bringing that product or service to market is going to bring the cost down, and the FAIRtax goes to the cash register as opposed to the government. You get to keep your business private, personal or otherwise, within the confines of your own home and your own operation. So I think it's a win-win there. Lots of money goes just for compliance, and we're not talking about the resources that goes into the making of the service or the product, delivering the service or providing the product. We're just talking about compliance within the tax code, and that's a lot of money. I was going to use another word in there, but I decided this is a family show. I mean, people are actually scratching their head right about now, going, "My gosh!" Of course, sometimes people get excited about getting that refund, go buy a new refrigerator or car or some big ticket item, as we can tell during the advertising season for the tax return season. We see a lot of those car dealers, ramping up their advertising. Come get a new car. How about a new washer and a dryer? What about a new microwave? With all that money you're going to get back, but it was your money in the first place. And so why don't you keep it during the year and do other things with it, like save it tax free?
Mm-hmm. You're right on every single one of those points, Bob. And I tell you, let's think about your last point for a second. I get my own money back in a refund, and then I go out and I buy that GE microwave or that Ford car, and I guarantee you those firms are paying lots of money to accounting firms for their tax liabilities. And what do you essentially do with your own money? You're paying Fords, GEs, not to pick on those guys, any companies, tax obligations to the federal government and their compliance costs. You're paying it all when you go buy their product. That'll really make your mind twist around a little bit.
Not to mention the actual pieces of that product, the wiring, the glass, the sheet metal for a vehicle, all those raw materials that go into delivering that product. That's in addition to the compliance costs of the tax code.
Yep. Let's move on here. You've got some really interesting numbers from the Tax Foundation.
Yeah, and again, I'm not trying to avoid your question. I'll try to bring this back down to more of an individual level here. So we talk about $600 billion a year in individual and company compliance costs to comply with the tax code. And let's think about TurboTax. That's something a lot of individuals can probably relate to, or other tax software costs. So I know some of us might have thought we were getting the free edition. And then upon trying to wrap things up, we get that message that, we had certain activity that was beyond the scope of the free version. And we end up shelling out $50, $100, or $150 or more to not have to spend another several hours inputting all of our information for the year on another tax return platform. That it hits even individuals who are doing their individual taxes on TurboTax. But the Tax Foundation, they estimate, and this is as of 2016, $409 billion a year in compliance cost. And you know what? Just to let this sink in, that's the gross output, the gross product of 36 states. $409 billion a year.
Wow.
We spend complying is the gross product of 36 states. That's too much. That's incredible. Not in a good way.
Money.
Yeah.
And who get? We know that we talked in the last few episodes about the Internal Revenue Service and their UNIVAC computers and things like that.
Yeah.
Where does all that money? I mean, the compliance costs, that's just on the company side that we've been talking about. But the Internal Revenue Service, the amount of money that it takes to operate that behemoth department, federal
$12 billion a year.
Yeah, it's insane. It's an absolute insanity. So that's coming out of the taxes that you and the corporations and everybody else pays during the course of the year on that side of the equation, the tax return equation, income tax return equation.
Yes, it's the ugliest snowball you've ever seen. There's dirt and sticks and disgusting substances in this snowball because it all wraps together.
Yeah.
The IRS, we pay for it with our taxes, makes the cost of products higher. It's a horrible, horrible snowball.
We'll take a break for just a second and say you're watching FAIRtax Power Radio, and Jade Walle is here, who is in the middle of tax season, taking time to speak with us here in the final days about why we should just go ahead and you can all breathe easier right now. There's a certain amount of tension. People wake up in the middle of the night and go, I can't take it anymore. Well, all you have to do is say fair tax on consumption. It's the best way to go. It's not only not designed by Washington, D.C. politicians, it's designed by thinking individuals. And I don't mean to say that in a derogatory term for our politicians that they're not thinking, but maybe they are in their own way. But it's something that will actually make your life easier this time of year. And you just go on about your business and you put your money in your pocket and you save it. And that's what we're talking about. We're illustrating today the time cost is something else that is enormous, that has value. It has there's a dollar value associated with time, with the cost of the time involved in this.
Yeah, but Jade, before you get into that time element, let's talk about opportunity costs.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I didn't answer your question, Bob, before. You wanted some stats from the Tax Foundation.
Oh, yeah.
So
okay.
out of this, they estimate $409 billion a year in annual compliance costs. Well, how does that break down between, individuals, businesses? So of this $409 billion, and I know this is radio, so we'll keep this pretty concise. $147 billion spent a year on U.S. business tax returns. $99 billion on U.S. individual tax returns. And we have to pause and realize that some of those U.S. individual tax returns, like Bob Scarborough mentioned, actually are businesses. They're just sole proprietors or partnerships that have their income flow through to the individual income tax returns. So 99 billion individual, 46 billion S corp tax returns, 23 billion tax form 4562 depreciation and amortization. And the list actually goes on to sum up to the 409 billion, but 23 billion a year just to comply with form 4562 on depreciation. It blows your mind.
That's insane. Our time's getting on here. Let's get into the opportunity cost and then some more of the figures associated with the time element.
Yep. So before we go to the time component of the cost of our tax system, there is a concept we learn in college business classes called opportunity cost. And opportunity cost is the loss of potential gain relative to other alternatives. Make no mistake, the opportunity costs are absolutely real. And the IRS commissioner in testimony last year confirmed that annual illegal U.S. tax evasion amounted to $1 trillion a year. Note that this $1 trillion annual cost is consistent with a recent study commissioned by the Americans for Fair Taxation. So what this means is that by employing our current dilapidated, outdated, outmoded, underserving and underperforming income tax system, we as a nation forego collecting an incremental $1 trillion a year that our current laws say should be collected.
Wow, that's insane. Okay, get into the time element here.
Yep. So 8.9 billion hours every year, let that sink in, are spent by Americans complying with our income and payroll tax code. Many of these hours come in the form of employees of large businesses that deal with weekly payroll tax remittances, corporate income tax departments, and similar groups. But note that this is an estimate from the Tax Foundation of what time Americans would spend complying with the tax code for the 2016 year, which is now 6 years stale. It's likely much higher than 8.9 billion hours. And so to put this into perspective, this equates to approximately 4.3 million full-time workers doing nothing all day, every day, all year long, except for working on tax returns. 4.3 million full-time workers. That's not an insignificant portion of our population that basically are spent every day, all day on tax returns.
So how many hours go, and break it down by business and individual and S corp stuff like you did earlier?
You bet. The Tax Foundation takes these 8.9 billion and says 2.8 billion U.S. business tax returns, 2.8 billion hours, 2.6 billion hours U.S. individual tax returns, 889 million hours S corp tax returns, 448 million hours tax form 4562 depreciation, and the list goes on and on. This also includes individual Americans' time complying with the tax code. My wife occasionally works as a sole proprietor interior decorator. So I'll bring this home to a real life normal American example. And even with a little business activity, nothing too complex, there have been countless nights where I'm up until 2 a.m. researching IRS income tax instruction forms on how to account for her Schedule C business appropriately. I doubt my late night hours over the years are even included in this 8.9 billion time estimate.
Well, and then it's during the course of a normal business day for a small business owner, maybe a one individual. And we have a relationship in our company with a gentleman that's like this. And he's working all day. He gets up in the morning, works from, as we say here in the North Carolina area, from can see to can't see. And and then he spends time with his family for a little while, and then he's still up into the wee hours of the morning, like you just said, Jade, and puts time in for calculating all of his expenses that went out that day and the week before, and it is a second job for him. He's told me that it's like I take my hat off during the evening, and then I get up in the morning and I'm doing it again. But in the middle, I'm my own bookkeeper and my own tax account.
All right. Well, the clock is running still. Let's flip this over. And the whole purpose for doing this is to let people know there is a better way. We don't have to spend all this money. We don't have to spend all this time. There's a better way to do it.
Yep. Let's take these two concepts, money and time, and say, well, what about the FAIRtax? How does the FAIRtax handle all this?
Absolutely.
So there's one point in the original FAIRtax book. It's in footnote 1 on page 55. I remember that the 22% decrease in costs we would experience under the FAIRtax relative to the income tax does not include the elimination of virtually all of these current income tax compliance costs. Wow. This means that under the FAIRtax, retail costs of goods and services will actually decrease more than we expect based on the studies that depict FAIRtax enactment's effect on U.S. retail items. They didn't include these $400 billion a year in this amount. These all drop out of the cost of everything that we buy. And here's some other good stats. Currently, there are approximately 100 million total U.S. businesses, a lot of those individual sole proprietorships. Only 2.5% are retail businesses. So you're probably asking, well, Jade, won't businesses still have to comply and spend tons of compliance costs to comply with the FAIRtax? No, only 2.5% of our 100 million businesses are retail businesses. We all remember the FAIRtax is only a tax on the retail end use consumer. So that means only 2.5 million businesses will have to collect and remit the FAIRtax. And of these 2.5 million businesses, about 15% of them, about 375,000 businesses, make up about 90 to 95% of all the sales of goods and services. Think Walmart, Amazon.
Mm-hmm. That'll do.
So what does this mean?
What does that mean for businesses?
Yeah. Well, that's the question. What does this mean? Businesses comprise a vast majority of compliance costs, like we saw, and time spent. And with the FAIRtax, nearly all escape this current tax compliance burden. And those few retail businesses that do collect and report the FAIRtax will do it at much less of a burden and cost than the current businesses do with the income tax. So to explain how?
You can computerize it.
Exactly. So how and why would this be, Jade? compliance costs under the fair tax, it's only retail businesses. They have a 0.25% fee received for their collection trouble. And it's an easy report, like you said, Bob, that they just have how many sales did I have? I multiply it by the fair tax rate, done. And there's no exemptions, exclusions, county by county tax rate changes. It's a simple calculation.
Wow.
And those businesses are already collecting a state sales tax in most cases too.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. And so they've already got the systems and the mechanisms, the point of sale terminals to collect the state sales tax. It just goes into the same system. You don't even need to buy new software most of the time to collect the fair tax. And I'll tell you, on the opportunity cost we talked about, this 1 trillion that we don't collect with our income tax system, the logical question would be, well, what does illegal tax evasion look like with the fair tax? Well, let me humbly reference a September 2020 tax evasion study penned by a gentleman named Jade Walle. I know you probably never heard of this guy, and that wouldn't be surprising. Yeah, I don't. In this research based on state sales tax evasion studies, IRS data, and extrapolation, the estimated 2026, so a few years down the road, 2026 illegal tax evasion would go from 1.2 trillion, as it's currently estimated, to 55 billion. You heard right, 1.2 trillion to 55 billion. And so that's a 95%, over 95% reduction in illegal tax evasion. So that opportunity cost we talked about, it is virtually eliminated with the fair tax.
Oh, that is staggering. We got about 4 minutes here. Let's go ahead and continue on real quickly.
Okay, on time, the 8.9 billion hours of time spent complying with the tax code, virtually eliminated with the fair tax. If we go back, it's only 375,000 U.S. retail businesses that make up 95% of retail sales. Imagine how few tax collectors there are under the fair tax compared to our current 100 million businesses and over 100 million individual family tax returns having to be compiled and filed each year. The reality with the fair tax is that there would be minor compliance time spent with retailers to collect and accurately remit the fair tax collected at the sales tax register to their respective states. The large retailers would have nearly all of this processed in an automated fashion, point of sales terminals like we talked about. The billions and billions of hours spent on income tax returns and tax forms above all go away with the fair tax, including my late night hours scouring the obscure IRS instruction forms on, and how to do my wife's interior decorating business.
That's right.
We could say that there is an opportunity cost here as it relates to our time, just as with our dollars. What would we do? What would you do with this extra time? What would our corporations and cutting edge and startup businesses do with the gift of time given back to them? And it kind of wraps into, the overall conclusions we'll talk about. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I'm just saying, go ahead and wrap this up with exactly what does this mean? What could we as taxpayers and consumers expect to see when the fair tax replaces the income tax?
Yeah, let's get this practical so we can all, talk about this in plain English. This means lower prices to consumers, higher wages to employees or a combination thereof, higher investment returns for owners, higher dividends and distributions for everyone's 401ks and Roth IRA accounts with special benefits to our retirees, and higher investment in business such as R&D and other innovations, inventions and ventures to hopefully make our lives better. It's some combination. When all these costs drop out, it's all of the above or some combination thereof is how that gets manifested. And as it relates to the time given back to individuals and businesses, all 8.9 billion hours a year. Imagine what technological and other innovative breakthroughs could be explored, advanced, and capitalized. Imagine the positive effect on our companies and their people's morale. Imagine the effect on individual families, relationships, and avoided hassle, arguments, and consternation around small business and family-run business tax issues. The benefits are almost incalculable. In fact, we actually have no equation. It would be such a multivariate equation. You need a crazy supercomputer to actually run it. So now that we understand the cost in both dollars and hours of our income tax code, and believe me, we've only really touched the highlights of those costs relative to the fair tax, we should absolutely demand the death penalty for the IRS while we usher in the freedom from wasted time and money with the fair tax. That's in my opinion, Bob.
Excellent.
Not to mention the level of stress, the cumulative release of stress across this nation from everybody, homes, families, corporations, you, Jade, everybody. I mean, it's just going to be, it would be an incredible release of stress, I believe.
That's an intangible cost or benefit that we would receive with the FAIRtax. And it's hard to put a dollar price tag on that, isn't it? I mean, but that is a benefit.
Absolutely. And again, the FAIRtax will not put you CPAs out of business, will it?
No, it will not. I always like to tell this story, Bob. I know you've heard it. One of my deal partners in the firm, works on large transactions and deals and integrating companies and all this stuff. I whiteboarded it up for him one night, and he's like, "Wait, so you're not taxing production and making things and business to business? You're taxing you're not taxing capital gains, gains on sales of businesses. Wait, this is going to be a boon. This is going to encourage M&A, merger and acquisition activity. This is going to encourage business deals and transactions and making larger, integrated, more efficient company. This is going to be great," is what his conclusion was. So imagine all that extra work on the transaction side that we get. Yes, our tax line of service gets diminished quite a bit, but some of the small mom and pop stores decades back kind of went away when Walmart came to town. And I think none of us would want to pay double the cost for that Clorox at the small mom and pop when we can go to Walmart and get it for half price. It's painful at the time, but it's the right thing to do ultimately.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what, I certainly appreciate you lending us your expertise as we, again, are watching people pulling their hair out, trying to get their tax returns done. And I just thought of something the other day. I'm not sure exactly when your next Walle's FAIRtax World is scheduled, but I have a subject for you to consider. And that would be, what we're seeing just, I won't say it's unprecedented because I lived through the 70s and I know what the inflation was like when Jimmy Carter was president. But let's examine how the FAIRtax would help mitigate inflation. Can we do that?
That's a good thought. I think we could have some conversation on that.
Okay, well, put some thought into that, and we'll see what we can come up with for that one.
Okay.
All right. Well, that's is that it? Anything more, Scarborough, you want to add?
I'm done, man. I'm ready to. I'm ready to get. I got to get back to my shoebox and my CPA firm. Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe is working on my tax returns right now.
Let's adopt the FAIRtax and make April 15th or April 18th this year, or April 19th if you're in Maine and Massachusetts, another beautiful spring day.
Absolutely.
Hey, that sounds like a great idea. And again, I guess that's going to wrap up this edition of FAIRtax Power Radio. And we're going to thank you so much for watching and listening. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Bob Scarborough.
And I'm Jade Walle.
The three FAIRtax guys reminding you the FAIRtax is the only truly fair tax. Once you understand it all together, you'll demand it.
So tell me, how could I pay less taxes?
Less?
Yeah, I'm trying to get ahead, so how can I pay less?
Well, I suppose you could pay less taxes by earning less money, or you could give to charity.
How is that going to help?
Actually, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but if you know the right people, okay, or if you have a really good lawyer, you can usually get around the big ones.
If I may, under the FAIRtax, to pay less taxes, you would simply consume less. You would control how much you pay and when you pay your taxes simply by choosing what you purchase and when you purchase something.
So I could stay focused and get ahead.
Exactly.